Hi, boys and girls. Miss Kathy here from Shaler North Hills Library with another episode of Superheroes of STEAM. And today we are featuring The Secret Garden of George Washington Carver. So let's get right to our book and see what this is all about. It is written by Jean Beretta and illustrated by Frank Morrison. Washington, D.C., 1921. George Washington Carver addresses the U.S. Congress. 1921, so that's exactly 100 years ago. We are just beginning to learn the value of the peanut, Carver told the congressmen. Some of them laughed. One man made a racist remark. As a black man speaking to a room of all white representatives, Carver was not among friends. African Americans were still segregated by U.S. federal law and treated as second-class citizens. Carver had been given only 10 minutes to speak. He gave the audience 10 minutes they would never forget. Carver showed them how peanuts could be used to make dozens of items, including face cream, soaps, ink, cheese, instant coffee, paper, paints, glue, and much more. When his time was up, they were impressed. The chairman encouraged him to continue. "Go ahead, brother, your time is unlimited." Carver spoke for over an hour. From the time he was a boy, he had a deep desire to share what he knew. So then, why did he once have a secret garden? Look at that beautiful garden. Diamond Grove, Missouri, 1874. No one knew about the garden George kept hidden on the Carver farm. No one saw how the child cared for his flowers and how much he loved them. When he watered the clovers, their petals curved up like a smile. The black-eyed Susans winked when he patted the soil around their roots. He sang to the dandelions, and they waved to him with their long leaves. People used to tell him that growing flowers was a foolish waste of time. "Why don't you grow something you can eat?" neighbors said. "You can't make money selling flowers," said his brother James. "They're only good for attracting bees." "Don't let flowers take you away from your chores," warned Moses and Susan Carver. George was born in 1864. Like his mother and his brother, he was enslaved on the Carver farm. While still a baby, George and his mother were kidnapped. Days later, he was found close to death and brought back to the Carvers. His mother was never seen again. The next year, slavery was outlawed in the United States. Moses and Susan Carver did not have children of their own and raised George and his brother on the farm. George was a sickly child, which meant less time working and more time exploring. He filled the house with a steady stream of interesting plants and rocks. Susan taught him how to be creative with the little they had. Nothing was wasted. Turkey feathers were used to make sewing needles. They made dyes from nuts and berries. They used plants and leaves for medicine. Every day, he ran into the woods to discover something new. I want to know the name of every stone and flower and insect and bird and beast, he said. Education was limited at home. George had only one book, which he read dozens of times. I know this book by heart, he told Susan. I wish I could go to school with the white children. Slavery had ended, but U.S. segregation laws still denied black people the same rights as whites. George decided to create his own classroom in the woods and studied the subject he loved most, nature. And no matter how much people discouraged him, he wanted to grow flowers. George decided to grow them in a secret garden so no one could find them or tease him. It became a magical place for him. Tiny seeds went into the dirt and transformed into beautiful flowers. In his mind, the garden was a true gift from God, whom he called the Great Creator. Each day, George rolled the soil between his fingers to make sure it wasn't too wet or too dry. Some plants needed more rain, and some needed more sun. Come here, you need a haircut, George said, as he cradled a daisy in his hand and clipped off its dry petals. He spread them around the soil to help the flowers grow. At first, the gardening was difficult because he couldn't ask for help and reveal his secret. The more he experimented, the more he learned. George studied each new season by painting the life cycles of the flowers. Berries were used to make paints. Twigs and grass were used to make brushes. He learned how to protect the roots through the winter of flowers so they could be reborn in the spring. Welcome back, he whispered to the tiny sprouts. It was a special garden and could have remained secret forever, but eventually the young boy's generosity changed that. When George met a neighbor with a sick plant or flower, he offered to care for it. Part of his garden became a plant hospital. Wilting plants went in and blooming plants came out. No one could believe that such a small child had so many big ideas. Here comes the plant doctor, they'd say whenever he paid a visit. Think of all the people I can help, he told the garden. It inspired him to see their flowers growing side by side with his flowers. George breathed a sigh of relief. There's no need to be secret anymore. George knew there was much to see and learn away from the farm. At the age of 12, he said goodbye to his garden and set off on his own for a new adventure. He was only 12. In Neosho, Missouri, he lived with Mariah Watkins, who gave him advice he carried into adulthood. Learn all you can, George, then give it all back to our people. Over the next 18 years, he lived in several states and attended many schools to study art and agriculture. It was not easy. After being accepted to Highland College in 1885, the all-white school refused to admit him when they learned he was African American. But the young man was determined to get an education. In 1896, George Washington Carver became the first black man to study at, graduate from, and teach at Iowa Agricultural College. The same year, Booker T. Washington president of the Tuskegee Institute, hired him to teach agriculture. When Carver first arrived, he said everything looked hungry. The land, the cotton, the cattle, the people. Farmers were in trouble. Cotton crops were destroying their land. With little money and second-rate equipment, Carver built Tuskegee's first farming laboratory. He experimented with new crops to replace cotton, like sweet potatoes and soybeans. But the peanut was his champion. It had nutrients to nourish and refresh the soil. He convinced farmers to grow peanuts and then developed over 300 uses for them. It wasn't long before peanuts became the largest crop in the South. Carver also created a traveling schoolhouse called the Jessup Agricultural Wagon to visit poor farmers. It offered everything from tool demonstrations to medical care to pamphlets on how to improve farms and live healthier. In its first summer, the wagon visited over 6,000 people. Carver's advice saved countless farms and families. "What would you like to learn today?" he asked a farmer. "The best time to plow, or how to raise a strong cow?" Wherever he traveled, people went to hear him speak. After his historic day in front of the U.S. Congress, he became a living folk hero. He was also recognized as an early environmentalist, a voice for racial harmony, and an advisor to world leaders. With his new fame came many awards and honors, yet he remained a humble man, always ready to serve humanity. Since his days on the Carver farm, one thing never changed. Day after day I spent in the woods alone in order to collect my floral beauties and put them in my little garden I had hidden in the brush not far from the house. Regard nature, revere nature, respect nature. And there is a timeline. Let's talk about some of the major events in his life. 1864, he was born into slavery. To this day, nobody knows the exact date that he was born. His father died in an ox cart accident before he was born, and his mother, Mary and George, are kidnapped and taken across state lines to be sold. But George is rescued and his mother is never seen again, so he never knew his mom or dad. A year later, the 13th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution passed, outlawing slavery in the United States. As he was growing up, he was, we said, prevented from attending school. He moved to Neosho, Missouri to attend the Neosho Colored School and lived with Andrew and Mariah Watkins. He chooses an official last name of Carver. 2 years later, in 1878, he moved to Fort Scott, Kansas, looking for a better education. He leaves that town after he witnesses a black man getting killed on the street. 1 year later, he moved to Olathe, Kansas to attend school, living with the Seymours and helping with their laundry business. A year later, he moves with them to Minneapolis, Kansas. 1883, George visited the Carver farm and discovered that his brother, James, had died from smallpox. He never knew that he died. 1885, so now he is 21 years old. He graduates from high school in Minneapolis, Kansas, took Washington as his middle name to avoid confusion with another George Carver that he knew, and he is accepted to Highland College, but he was turned away because they found out he was black. Let's see here. We know about him being accepted at Simpson College. First black man to graduate from Iowa Agricultural College with a master's degree. Developed the traveling schoolhouse in 1906. British scientists make him a fellow at the English Royal Society for the Encouragement of the Arts in 1916, so his name was known even over in Britain. He addressed Congress in 1921. He receives many honorary doctorates here in later years. And he died in 1943. He never married or had children. The George Washington Carver National Monument is established at his birthplace in Missouri in the same year that he dies. And 2 years later, the U.S. Congress designates January 5th, the anniversary of his death, as George Washington Carver Recognition Day. And there's one last painting of him. So, the secret garden that led him to be such a famous man. Let's take a look at our Superheroes of STEAM packet, if you have that printed out. The first one, there is a science video about his life made for kids, link you can go to, actually 2 of them, and another site about having real photographs of people, and a video and more photographs, and the memorial at the number 3 site. At this National Peanut site, you can learn some little known trivia about him, plus go to other sites from their links, like the various museums that are set up to honor him and his inventions. There are quite a few activity pages to print out at the site in number 5. I included some in this packet, but you can pick out whichever you want. So, some of the things I included in the packet were labeling the parts of the peanut plant and coloring that. Color, trace, and learn about the kernel of the peanut. Read the description and watch how the parts are labeled. You can color that. Where do they grow? So they tell you the states and they are labeled on here, so you can color that in. Where do they grow? Besides the United States, they grow in these countries, and there are 4 mazes to help them get to their home country of China, India, and Senegal. Peanut butter is good for you. Make some of your own peanut butter. So there's a good recipe. It is pretty straightforward if you have a blender and some plain peanuts. A little bit of oil. That's all you really need to make peanut butter. Okay, some are difference of each of the equations, so you have to do a little bit of math here, and then you have to, the number that remains is the answer to the riddle. So you're going to cross off numbers as you find the answers up here. And then there should be 1 number left at the bottom, and that will be the answer to the riddle. By the time the average student graduates from high school, he or she will have eaten how many peanut butter and jelly sandwiches? That's the riddle, and you have to figure out what the correct answer is. Pyramid word puzzle can search for words relating to the peanut in the word search. Peanut farming, read the story below, then label each picture with the words that are found in bold through the story. So it may be a little hard to see which ones are bold, but you can kind of get the idea of what they're trying to show you in the picture, I think. There is a crossword puzzle. The clues are on this page, and the puzzle is on this page. So you might have to look up some of this on the internet. It didn't all come from our book. But there is a crossword puzzle, and I gave you the answers too in case you get stuck. And let's see what else. Oh, here's a really big word search. We had a little tiny one. This is a really big one with words that relate to him. A little bit more math. We have work each of the equations below, match the answer with the letter next to it, and fill in the blanks above in order to solve the riddle. So you have to add these up, and then if it's a letter, say it adds up to 691, where it says 691 up here, you're going to fill in the letter A. And somehow or other, it says, how do you divide 9 peanuts between 10 students? And when you fill in the letters from the math puzzle, you'll have the answer to the riddle. I like riddles. Riddles are fun. And reading a nutrition label and answering some questions about that for a nutrition label for peanut butter. And then off of another site, you can read the short little biography about George Washington Carver, and there's a real photograph of him. And there are a couple questions to answer at the bottom. And I included the answer sheet for that as well. And then we come to our craft, which is a super simple recycled water bottle planter. And I made the kitty cat one. You can make a dinosaur one, or you can use your own creativity and make whatever one you want. Now, I did not actually put real dirt and plant in mine yet. I may do that sometime, but I didn't want to get into that quite yet. So some things I found about making this and following the directions. I did not sand off the outside of the plastic like she says to. Lightly sand the outside to roughen up the surface, and so my paint was not sticking very well. Would it have stuck better if I had sanded? I guess, because that's what she recommends. But if you're in a bind, I ended up coloring up mine with white duct tape. So even if you have gray duct tape, the regular color, you could have a gray kitty cat or a gray dinosaur if the paint is not sticking to your water bottle. And you can just wrap it and make it. And then I drew on the face. I used some Google eyes like they called for. Drew on some ears. You might need to get an adult to help you cut in the water bottle though, because that's tricky cutting through the plastic. So please have somebody help you with that. And then I don't think there was anything else that was too hard about this. Yeah, I think that's about all you need. You can either paint or wrap. And I did use some tape to make a tail on it as well. But yes, there you have it. A kitty cat planter. So I think it turned out super cute, and if it actually had a real plant in it with leaves falling down, it would be even cuter. One thing I like to do with any sort of planter is punch some holes in the bottom before I actually go and put my plant in. They do mention about putting some rocks in the bottom because that helps with the drainage. But if you water your plant, I like the water to be able to come back out again if it's too much for the plant, so the roots aren't sitting in there getting soggy, even if you do have the rocks in the bottom. So I always put a few holes in the bottom of the planter before I put dirt into it. And then I still put the rocks in to give it a little bit of, the roots lifted up a little bit from the very bottom. But I think the holes is the important part, because then they have to put it on a plate or something if you're going to water it. If it has holes in it, that's the only thing, because the water may come running out. So I hope you learned something about George Washington Carver. And I think there was one final coloring sheet you could do for him. But I certainly did. I never had any idea they did so many things with the peanut. I thought one of the sheets that I had printed out talked about some of the uses of the peanut. But now, when I went through them all, I didn't quite see what one that might be. Maybe it was on a different website that I didn't put in here. But at any rate, we know that it makes a lot of things. He listed some of them when he was speaking before Congress. So, have a wonderful week. Hopefully you will tune back in next time for another episode of Superheroes of STEAM. And this has been Miss Kathy from Shaler North Hills Library. Remember, you can come in and visit us 6 days of the week. We are open to the public. Just check the website for the hours. And if you can't come in or don't want to come in, we will be happy to fill requests for you, and you can pick them up at our pickup window. So whichever you prefer. And thank you for watching. Bye.